Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into something that literally touches every single one of us, every single day. We are talking about the invisible engine running human society, politics and power. Now, right off the bat, forget the idea of politics as some dry, dusty academic subject. This isn't just about memorizing textbooks. This is the ultimate playbook for understanding how the world actually works, how decisions get made, and how influence truly operates behind the scenes. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, defining the political game. Second, unpacking political power. Third, how we detect power. Fourth, where power comes from. And finally, exercising and using power.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, Defining the Political Game.
We really need to start by completely stripping away the idea that politics only happens in grand marble buildings or during big election cycles. It's so much more than that. The foundational sociologist Max Weber actually put it best. He said, politics is the striving to share power or striving to influence the distribution of power. And you know what? That dynamic is happening everywhere, all the time. So to translate that rather dense academic speak into plain English, at its core, politics is really just the resolution of conflict and the distribution of values. Look, humans are always going to have competing aspirations, right? Politics is simply the system of interactions we use to settle those disagreements. It's how we decide who gets what, when they get it, and exactly how they get it. Moving right along to Section 2, Unpacking Political Power. Now that we know what the game is, we've got to talk about its ultimate currency, power. Political scientist Robert A. Dahl framed this brilliantly. He basically said, A has power over B to the extent that he can get B to do something that B would not otherwise do. I love that. It's just a beautifully simple way to look at something so incredibly complex. At the end of the day, it's all about changing someone's baseline behavior.
So, the crucial point here, the thing you absolutely must remember, is that power isn't a property. It's not an object. You can't just put it in your pocket and carry it around. It is purely relational, behavioral, and situational. Think about a father's influence over his kids. His power isn't some physical thing. It exists entirely in relation to his children, and it dynamically shifts based on that specific family situation.
But, what happens when that spontaneous, natural influence just isn't enough? Well, that brings us to coercion. When simply asking nicely or carrying a quiet authority fails to change behavior, coercion steps in. That's when you see the use of threats or sanctions to essentially force the issue. Now, this brings up a super fascinating question, one that sociologists wrestle with constantly. If power is literally invisible, if it's purely behavioral and relational, how do we actually detect it in the wild? How do we figure out who really holds the cards? Which leads us perfectly into Section 3, How We Detect Power. Time to put on our sociology detective hats. Robert Dahl gave us a fantastic, systematic way to measure this invisible force using 4 distinct symptoms. First, formal office, meaning who literally holds the official titles. Second, judges' views, basically asking the insiders who they think is actually calling the shots. Third, decision-making, watching closely to see who participates when a real, tangible choice is made. And fourth, comparing activities, weighing who initiates a proposal and successfully pushes it through, even against heavy opposition. But, and this is a big but, here's the catch. Absolutely none of those 4 methods are perfect all on their own. I mean, think about it. A total kingmaker might pull all the strings from the shadows, but holds 0 formal office. To truly measure power, you have to observe its weight, its scope, and its domain. You really have to combine all these observation techniques together to accurately capture someone's true influence. It's like putting together a giant puzzle. Let's move on to Section 4, where power comes from. So we know what it is, and we know how to spot it. Now let's dig into the arsenal itself. Power relies on very specific foundational bases to create an asymmetrical advantage. In capitalist societies, wealth is obviously a massive base. Control over military violence is another huge one. And then, of course, there's personal skill, just the sheer individual capacity and charisma that we observe in powerful people across literally all human cultures. But here's the thing. Having just a raw base isn't going to cut it for long-term control. You need what we call multipliers: knowledge, organization, and legitimacy. Knowledge helps leaders seize opportunities, and a well-knit organization ensures they can actually execute their plans.
But above all the rest is legitimacy. If the masses truly believe an authority is legally and morally justified, power is accepted without a fuss. Without that legitimacy, raw authority is incredibly fragile. It can shatter in an instant.
Okay, so let's say you have the wealth, you've got the organization, and people see you as legitimate. The resources are all gathered up. But how do you actually wield the weapon? How is all of this applied to actually alter reality? Let's get into it in our final section, Section 5, Exercising and Using Power. Let's move to and see how this builds in the real world. The actual exercise of power usually follows a pretty clear escalation ladder. It starts at the bottom with persuasion, using logic and reason to convince someone without any force at all. If that doesn't work, it moves up a step to rewards. If rewards still aren't enough to change behavior, it escalates to punishment. And finally, sitting at the very top of that ladder is force. This dynamic perfectly illustrates the classic carrot and the stick approach, or what academics call positive versus negative sanctions. Positive sanctions are your carrots, rewards, loans, assistance, honors. Negative sanctions are the stick, threats, taking away rewards, and punishments. But there is a profoundly important takeaway here. Relying too heavily on constant punishment and coercion, that actually indicates the inherent weakness of a system, not its strength. And that brings us to the very highest rung of the ladder, force. This is the naked, absolute, brute expression of power, when literally all else fails. The actual physical use of a threat and punishment is force, and its absolute most extreme, devastating expression is war. It's the ultimate last resort, used only when persuasion, rewards, and everyday sanctions have completely and utterly collapsed. Wow, so we have navigated the entire political playbook today, from its invisible definitions all the way to the raw application of force. And that leaves us with one final, totally provocative thought to chew on. Is power an inherent corruption that we should all fear? Or is it simply the necessary engine required for any human organization to even function? I want you to take these frameworks, look at the organizations around you, your workplace, your local government, and observe these dynamics for yourself. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.